Welcome to our partnership employment salon on engaging with employers. My name is Miguel Peromingo, and I'm here organizing this salons together with Eamon de Bern. We're both consultants for employment policy, employment services. We're in the industry for more than, I don't know how many years we covered together, but probably 20 and 30. So that's we worked for employment services in the institutions, in partner institutions, and now we're working on our own, and we're organizing these salons to give a little bit of room to discuss with different stakeholders on how partnerships can work in employment services with public, private, third sector, and which topics are of the highest priority. And one of them that we identified, and that I think since I started working with public employment services 20 years ago, is maybe one of the most important topics that is coming up all the time, and that's engaging with employers and cooperating with employers. And I'm happy to welcome all our guests today. We have different experts and practitioners from the field of engaging with employers. We have Joe Ingold, who is an associate professor at the Human Resource Management at the Deakin Business School, a university in Australia. You, Joe, have previously worked in the nonprofit sector, policy research, people development, and also for DWP in the UK government. And you also worked for the Leeds University. And I think it's fair to say that you're an international expert on employer engagement in employability and skills programs. We have Sabine Blanchet from the French Public Employment Service, Pôle emploi. You are an international mobility advisor, and you're also a EURES advisor. You work for the European Employment Service, a network of advisors of the European Union to foster mobility. You're also a training expert, so you're training in that field, and you're focusing on skills matching and job seekers and vacancies, and you work directly with employers, such as NonStop consultant who you brought along, Franck Lucarelli, is talent acquisition specialist at NonStop Consultant, and you recruit entry-level consultants for your company who will then become HR specialists for sectors like finance, IT, education. We will hear more about that. Then we have Tony Carr. Tony Carr is an employability consultant for Forefront Partners. Tony, you have worked with employment-related services for almost 20 years as well. You have particular interest in how employment programs intersect with business community, and you want to see business more closely embedded within commissioning and delivery. So you're basically like an intermediator between public and private. And we have Warwick Brown, who is director and COO from the JPR Group. Your company offers cleaning, security, traffic control, and facilities management in Australia. Yep. You had experience with various providers and programs, and over 20 individuals placed in your organizations through employment service programs. And your company is also 51% indigenous owned.
Correct, yes.
Okay, perfect. So welcome to you all. I'd like to share a couple of thoughts on employer engagement from things I've been reading, conversations I've been having recently. I think that employer engagement is crucial for employment services because you gotta have trust with the employers. The employers need to have trust in your work for the corporation as employment service, and that generates that they will give you your vacancies. The vacancies create opportunities, you can place people, and that's ultimately the goal of employment services. So if you don't work with employers, you're not gonna be able to do your job as an employment service. I've just read in the survey from the ILO that will be published soon, where 90-something public employment services were asked how they work with employers. 90% responded that they do. 85% even pre-select candidates And 86% say that they do things like recruitment fairs and engage in a wider cooperation with employment services. That does not necessarily say how that works, but it says that they acknowledge that it's important. Only 58% though answered that they have a larger strategy in place to work with employers and don't do it just on an ad hoc basis when a vacancy comes in, but they also have some proactivity behind it. And in many countries around the world, especially with public employment services, they don't play such a big role in employer engagement in the recruitment market. They have a small percentage. It's rather exceptional that employment services would have really a strong role in doing so. So there are a couple of issues there. It's about the quality of what employment services are able to offer, or how the quality is regarded by employers. Then it's often an issue of knowledge. Not many employers know what employment services can do and what range of services they have. There is an image issue there. If you talk to employers why they don't cooperate with employment services, especially with public ones, they will say, okay, they don't have the people we need. It's too administrative. They are not proactive enough. And often they also don't know what the employment service can offer, which can be quite a wide range of HR services that can be an asset and an added value to the employer. Then sometimes the communication, in my experience, can be a challenge when employment services assume what employers want, but don't necessarily ask them. So there is no established communication to really make a good assessment and have a good understanding of what the employers want. So those are the fields, I guess, to look at, and I'm looking forward to see your experience with that. In places where it works well, employment services work on the image they have towards employers. They engage proactively. They have a strategy in place. I think that's quite important, not to go out to employers without having a clear idea of segments, a clear idea of sectors, a clear idea of service chains and value chains. And I guess it also makes sense to set up common objectives through agreements, but also maybe through looser memorandum of understanding, or having an understanding of how are we going to cooperate together. And I think that you can share some experiences there. What are the communication channels? I think makes sense. Public employment services and employment services in general are, through the digital revolution, also getting quite a lot more data now, which can be interesting also for employers. And lastly, and with that I will finish my introduction, I think it is important to look at wider systems, not just employment service, but there are a lot of other actors that play into kind of successful recruitment and successful development and successful care for vulnerable groups. And that can be people like Tony, that can be training institutes, that can be third sector providers, or that can be social services for those that need a little bit more help to enter the labor market. So we're talking about ecosystems. That's a little bit of a buzzword, but in the end of the day, I think it makes sense to look at wider partnerships, not just like a one-on-one employment service employer, but see who else can help to make the recruitment and the placement a success. And with that, I would like to pass over to Eamon to kick off the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Miguel. As you touched on, there's a view that I think I would particularly share, and I suspect all of our guests do as well today, that it's impossible to deliver an effective employment service without a well-founded employer engagement strategy. Many of the discussions in recent years have been that the nature of the relationship between employers and employment services is fundamentally changing, because we're now in the midst of what's now been coined the fourth industrial revolution. I wondered, Joe, if I could start with you. I mean, where do you think the public employment services can particularly help employers meet the recruitment challenges of this fourth industrial revolution and this kind of fundamental change in whole relationship, perhaps, between workers, employees and employers. What do you think needs to happen?
Okay, thanks, Eamon. So firstly, I'm going to speak more broadly about the everything I say will refer to the employment services ecosystem, because of course, well, with contracted out services in Australia and the UK, so public and for-profit and non-for-profit social enterprises as well. So, I mean, for example, if you look at Australia at the moment, I'm sure Warwick will have really interesting things to say as an employer. There are lots of vacancies, but we know that that there's so many people disconnected from the labour market, and also skills mismatches. So I think how I see employee engagement is as it's more than just kind of sending bodies, sending labour. It's really that value proposition for how you can build a workforce for the future. So it's not just the vacancies now, it's actually about sustainable careers as well, which and also you mentioned digital, Miguel. That's you know, not robots are not going to come and take everyone's jobs, particularly not hairdressers, but I think we shouldn't get carried away just on the digital aspects, but more about how this, I know it's much talked about, the sustainable career pathways, but that is so important, because what we need to focus on is reducing that cycling between employment services and social security and sort of short-term attachment to work. And that's a nut that really hasn't been cracked, particularly for those that are further from the labour market.
Indeed. Perhaps I could follow up on one of your points there, Joe. You mentioned about sustainable career transitions. Traditionally, employment services found somebody a job, and there was an expectation that for many people that job could be very long-term, or perhaps their entire working life. Now that kind of presumption is probably becoming less likely to be the case. Do employment services need to do something quite different in terms of preparing somebody to deal with this kind of situation where an occupation could change radically or disappear within quite a short term?
That's a really good question. As always, this depends on commissioning, and that's yeah, it can be a constraint on what providers of employment services do. Let's be honest, because you find there's different pots of funding, you know, for kind of rapid response to redundancy in particular sectors, and perhaps, you know, provision that is too little, too late. I would say absolutely that is where the focus needs to be, and that is about, as Miguel was saying in the opening, in his opening remarks, about understanding the sector, understanding the local labour market, understanding that particular employer. There's definitely thinking now that in terms of those job to job and career transitions, we need to be thinking of, in the broader terms of success beyond just one organisation, and also progression within one organisation. But I think we can maybe be honest that public policy has perhaps struggled to keep up with that, with changes in the labour market, I would say. And then providers, I mean, I'm sure colleagues like Tony will have a lot to say about this as well. If we're talking about what is the value proposition of providers to employers, if I'm an employment services provider in Australia going out to Warwick, I need to kind of do something that's added value that he isn't already getting. Otherwise, why would he use my services over and above somebody else's? You know, there's not just the case of he's, you know, I'm providing a free service, so Warwick can no longer use he doesn't use labour hire, and that's a saving, because if we don't get it right, then that isn't a saving. So, and there's a lot more I could say about the kind of in-work progression piece, and what that means, particularly reflecting on UK policy, but I'll pause there and let other colleagues come in.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to bring Sabine now into the discussion, if I may. I mean, I think we've all agreed already, Sabine, that it's essential to have an effective employer engagement strategy to be able to serve the needs of our clients, our job seekers. Pôle emploi has got, I think, a deserved reputation as having a very well developed employer engagement strategy. Could you tell us what you think the main components are of your approach in France? What are the key features of it? Thank you.
Of course. First of all, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation, Miguel and Eamon. So before explaining the holistic approach of Pôle emploi, you know, in the frame of our strategy, I would like to present you Pôle emploi, because I think when we are talking about public services, we don't really act in the same way in different countries, and it's really important to have a few facts and figures about Pôle emploi, so you can understand better how we are interacting, in particular with employers. First of all, I would like to tell you that we are 57,400 employees at Pôle emploi, and among them, roughly 5,500 are in charge and dedicated to the company. So there is a really strong effort, you know, from the French pace to work and provide added value services to the companies. In the last decade, I mean, in the last year particularly, we specialize on services for employers because we wanted to provide services customized to their needs, and also be able to cover the whole territories. So we are spread all over the country. We have around 1,000 agencies, taking into consideration the specific needs of the company linked to the economic environment of the region, and also the specific needs depending on the sectors. So that's really important. And just to give you a quick overview, last year, over 13 million job offers was posted on our national website. And despite the pandemic, 78% of the job seekers versus 84.8% of employers were really satisfied with our services. And one of my activity is also to work with the cooperation department of Pôle emploi. And we are having benchmark, and we are providing also technical assistance to foreign pays, particularly in Africa, South Africa, and also in Europe, because we are having a specific approach. And also our motto as public services is to do more for those who need the most, is to say the young people, also the people with some maybe vulnerable as far as the market. And we are trying to adapt and help upskill those people to the needs of the companies. And our sixth major mission as Pôle emploi also is to take care of the registration of the job seekers and delivery of information for them. But mostly, as far as the employers are concerned, is to collect, of course, the job offer and posting them. But the major aspect of our services is nowadays to accelerate and secure the recruitment for the company. And so in that aspect, we are adapting our services to the company, offering a full range of services, and taking also into consideration the specific needs. And I think Miguel told earlier that, for instance, it was really important that employers could see which kind of services we could offer them. So we developed lately a bundle service, you know, that we have online, where the company can see for each needs which kind of solution we can provide them. And there are a lot of different services we can offer. That's really important to have that in mind. We also provide specific services depending of the sectors. And also because of the pandemic, we had new platforms that we developed to be able to face the needs of the company, urgent needs in specific sectors, for instance. So do you want me to go on specific aspects?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Something that's very interesting, and we'll come back to you perhaps a bit later and exploring some of those issues in a bit more detail. Perhaps if I could bring Franck in now, if I may. We heard a lot about the very well-directed approach in Pôle emploi towards building up relationships with employers. irrespective of whether the service is provided directly by the Public Employment Service or by other organisations under contract. The extent of handling of vacancies by public employment services or organisations act on their behalf varies considerably from country to country. What do you think, Frank, really encourages or discourages an employer from working with the state employment service as opposed to deciding they're going to direct their business towards private actors?
So for me, my first of all, if I wanted to work with so French Pôle emploi, it's a free service. So they give you visibility of your company. So first of all, I think it's a really good way also to show your company and maybe to have the possibility to hire people who did not know you. And on the other hand, what could discourage companies is that they don't know the services. I think is the main issue. For instance, as they cover Sabine and Valérie, by luck, one of my candidates talk about me, about the international mobility, and they provide a bonus scheme for candidates who's looking for job abroad. And I think maybe it just because the companies they did not know the services, and it could be the main issue. Otherwise, I think for me, it's a really good way to have free CVs, free candidates. They can also create free events for you. You can have present your company, and the main, let's say, my main goal is to build a long relationship with them. Also, it's just not just one shot, one CV. That is really important for me to have a long relationship with them, and like this, they can really provide you the full services and all free service what they are providing actually. So. But I would say what they discourage maybe companies is maybe they're afraid that they don't provide the skills what they are looking for. But in my case, let's say we are not really looking for any education background or any experiences. So for me, it's not an issue because the only thing what we are looking for in people is soft skills, motivation, and goals. So I was not really, let's say, afraid to work with them because then I will make my own selection and I will present the company, and I'm looking for more for both motivation, goals, and soft skills. But I think some companies they are more afraid that they won't provide what they are looking for.
Often we've heard this actually, that particularly sometimes, perhaps unfairly, for more higher end kind of recruitment initiatives, there's a view from employers that the public services will not be the way of sourcing the kind of workers they need. So there's something about perceptions. From your perspective, Frank, why do you think sometimes there can be a negative perception about people using public services or what public services can provide? Perhaps an extremely unfair one, but why do you think that perception's there?
Also, as a recruitment agency, we think that it's job seeker they don't have the skills because they are looking for a job. And as an agency, also we are doing headhunting people, so we are more looking for people who already work in companies. So this is also a main issue because I think if people they are thinking if they are looking for a job, so maybe they are not, they don't have enough skills or may not have enough experiences for us. But it could be not true in some cases. This is why I think the company, they have to be more open-minded and to let the chance for public services to show them what they can provide as skills people. And it's also a good way for, I think, for them to have some visibility.
Thank you, Frank. I mean, you've hit on a very interesting point, actually. It's a bit of a double jeopardy issue, actually, because probably a very high proportion of all people in work have been looking for a job at some stage. So it's a kind of almost inherently illogical statement, but I think it's one that's actually held very frequently. So it's very interesting. Perhaps, Tony, I could bring you in now thinking about that. Often kind of public-private cooperations have been seen as a way of partly attempting to kind of resolve some of these kind of negative perceptions in the labour market and some of the problems about perhaps the lack of information about on the part of both employers and job seekers. What do you think are the most fruitful areas that can be pursued in terms of public-private collaboration? And I'm particularly thinking in terms of a point that Miguel touched on as well, that with the growing connectivity, with more use of data, more digitalization, the kind of classic distinction between public and private services is probably collapsing now. And this phrase, the ecosystem, is often spoken about. And so, and it's immaterial to a job seeker, probably, who's providing them with information as long as they can receive it. So what do you think are the most fruitful areas for public-private cooperation now?
Okay, thanks, Eamon, for the very difficult question, and thanks for the invite to this conversation. If it's okay, I'm going to answer that question, but ever so quickly to just touch on the point that Frank was making and the perception issue that you talked about, Eamon. I think there's two things, particularly from a UK perspective, where that's difficult. And the first one is, unfortunately, the kind of the media aspect of how unemployed people are often presented by certain media outlets, which it does not help the employer community want to engage with a particular group. So there's almost that kind of unfair negative perception. But the second thing, and I think this is borne out by Joe's research as well, is that, and it's more relevant as well, as where employers engage with either public or private employability support services and don't have a good experience, that can be more damaging for the long term, because there's actually a lot of goodwill from businesses and employers who want to work with unemployed people. But if they don't receive a good service, then that ultimately can put one off for pursuing it in the future. But to come to your more positive question about what the most fruitful collaborations are, it's an interesting one, because I think, and again, I talk mainly from the UK perspective, I think there are pockets of really good practice, but pockets, as in it's a bit of a disjointed and a different story in different parts of the country. And I think ultimately where you have fruitful collaborations, it's down to that point about collaboration. It's where relationships are established between, for example, local job centre employer engagement teams and a private sector provider or set of providers, often working in the same geography or with a particular focus on a particular industry, and they're working together to make it work. Because it doesn't necessarily work from the immediate setting up of a procurement round and the services which are procured in a certain area. So it takes on the ground collaboration to make things work. If I can just expand on that just for a second. So there was a study done a few years ago in a particular area of London. So we're talking about a 2 square mile area of Kensington. And in that area, it was found that there were 42 different employment programs, all operating within that one almost travel to work area. Now, what that means is for a business operating in that area and wanting to engage with an employment program, in effect, they've got 42 different conversations that they're going to have because of a lack of collaboration and a joined up approach. But that also speaks to your point about the kind of long-term sustainable and kind of progression route for job seekers, in as much as one provider might be providing an into work or back to work service, then you've got a different provider offering a development service or a skill development service for them in work. You've got another provider offering a health-related service to support people who become ill in work. So that again creates issues for employers who are having to engage with a very complex and disjointed market to get all of the different services that they need. However, back to the positive points. What we've seen in the UK where we've had the major commissioning rounds is where you've had a lead provider or set of providers working together to produce a collaborative employer offer, which meets lots of the different needs of employers in either a local area or going to a national employer and talking to a national employer about their needs across the country and plugging them in to different providers in that area. That's where it works well. But unfortunately, I'm always focusing on the fact that that's not necessarily in the majority of cases in the UK. There's one other point I will make before I hand back to you, Eamon, which is where we've seen in the UK over the past 20 years, there have been some success in trying to incentivize employer engagement or employers' involvement with employability services, which does a couple of things. One, and speaking to Miguel's earlier point, it raises the visibility of these services to employers because they're fundamentally often hidden or invisible to businesses. But secondly, it provides a bit of a behavioral driver for businesses who might be less inclined to engage with employment programs. It provides them with that kind of, okay, right, well, I'm going to get help with this young person who might be unemployed, but they're going to get a wage incentive for the first 6 months. Let's give it a go. So it's that kind of, help to engage with these services. So those are a few points from me, Eamon. Yeah. I would go on all morning, so you'll have to stop me.
Well, thanks for that. It's very interesting. Thank you very much, Tony. Perhaps before I bring Warwick in just a moment, I'd like perhaps, Joe, to ask you one question, if I may. Perhaps first an observation. I think Tony's quite helpfully described that often the system, when it doesn't work well, is based on a top-down approach in terms of lots of programs being delivered downwards, often in parallel with gaps and duplication, rather than starting from the perspective of the needs of the individual job seeker, potentially. But perhaps also, and perhaps a slightly more kind of global point, Australia, I think, was very famous for introducing perhaps one of the first kind of purchaser provider models. And I think the Australian model is quite heavily based traditionally on customer choice. I think the UK was more built on the kind of concept of competition, really. I'm not suggesting that one is that right and one's wrong. There's never a magic bullet. But perhaps could you give us a personal perspective on what you think it might be if you had to decide ultimately yourself, you controlled the world, would you go for customer choice or competition, perhaps, in terms of how you design a model? What would your view be, Joe, on that one? Okay.
Now, I have a bit of a thing about customer choice because, and that is what I would go for, because I see it as employment services, labour market policy seems to be a glaring omission in this kind of area of choice and if you like that kind of consumerization of public policy. So I'd be in favour of that. Of course, that we could talk about the issues of information and how perform, like the obvious Australia's a star rating system and that's supposed to give potential customers an indicator, but it might also be location or maybe services offered. So there needs to be transparent and clear information, really. But that's what I would plump for.
Thank you very much. If I can bring Warwick in now, perhaps from an employer's perspective. First of all, Warwick, how do you traditionally kind of recruit people into your organisation? You've got kind of a large organisation, kind of quite a lot of different activities. So what's your normal recruitment kind of approach?
Well, I guess it comes down to a couple of different things. So I guess our employment culture is a little bit different to a lot of other organisations. Being proudly owned and operated, our managing director being a proud Wiradjuri nation representative, that changes, I guess, our direction in where we look for. Where we look to people and those sort of things. One of our core values are working on participation, connecting with community, and making an impact. And that impact we make is around the dinner table. That's one of Murray's biggest things is, we need to make an impact in generational change within our communities, be it, we could be just a local community, it could be local Aboriginal communities, but just anyone in general, So we've got I guess our procurement and employment model is we source locally, we work with our preferred or partnered RTO in particularly in our areas of interest. We have a security services company, a cleaning services company, traffic control business and traffic management services, and our facilities property services, which the facilities property services has been operating for about 3 months now. It came through, I guess, a need within the marketplace with Aboriginal healthcare and housing home care. We decided that Murray had spoken with a number of key providers like Uniting and those sort of things, especially with Aboriginal healthcare, Australian Unity, and we identified that who's looking after our elderly community, and that was something that we decided that well, it should be us. They're our community. It's our responsibility. And if you look at the Wiradjuri nation and the Indigenous culture, it's all about the old way of learning. You learn from the elders. So the information's passed down from the elders, experiences are passed down from the elders, and that's what we're doing here. So our target market, we have obviously, as I said, security, traffic control, and cleaning. Security is a very regimented and highly regulated industry. Licensing, training, selection requirements, pre-criminal history checks are quite stringent. Therefore, that sort of eliminates part of our target market. Some of our targeted market for security, people that want to get into the industry can't because of those regulatory requirements. So to, I guess, make a difference, we can't just be a Wiradjuri owned and operated security company. We needed to diversify. So we diversified into cleaning. We found that cleaning was a good opportunity for people. Now, we specifically stayed away from corporate cleaning. And the reason we stayed away from corporate cleaning is a lot of big corporate organisations, particularly the larger organisations, banks and those sort of places, require background checks on all the people. Now, we put a background check on some of our individuals or some of our recruiters or recruitment strategies and some of our employees, prospective employees, and they can't pass the background check. I ran some figures after I had a conversation with Joe, and in 2020, we in our total recruitment for 2020 through Job Active, which is our new start sort of individuals, our DES, which is Disability Employment Services, TTW, which is Transition to Work, and the SLES, which is the School Leavers Education Systems. We've recruited in 2020, for the year of the financial year of 2020, we recruited 47 people through employment services. That worked out to be 80% of our full employment for the year. In 2021, that increased to just over 57 people. And of that 57 people, 90% were from employment services. And of that 90%, I'm proud to say that over 46% recognise themselves as being Aboriginal. So, we're not your average employer. I've been in the industry since 1996 as a security industry, and had some quite great roles in corporate security, venue security, and those sort of places, through to operational roles within big organisations like the Panthers Group, which is a 14 club hospitality group with hotels and stadiums and bits and pieces like that. And having the privilege of being able to work with some really great cleaners and some really good people, it gave me that opportunity to sort of come up with these ideas. And when Murray and I sat down and said, how are we going to benefit the community? Well, we had to work on jobs that were wholly and solely capable for our community to take on. So if that meant they needed jobs that didn't require a pre-criminal history check, that's where we went. So we started doing construction site cleaning, so cleaning of toilets, lunch sheds, change rooms on construction sites. And a construction site manager doesn't care if the recruit turns up with tattoos all over his arms, has to go off on a Tuesday for an hour to check in with his parole officer. Don't care, as long as the job gets done. Their job is to build something. We're successfully on the project at the Sydney Football Stadium now being built, which is going to be an A-class venue in New South Wales, and proudly we've had involvement in that. That's been the difference. So employing, as I said before, we learn from our elders, we learn from the past. We look at the old way of learning and make it a new way of learning. And we've got, I'm proud to say that we've recruited some elders from the local area around Moore Park, Maroubra, La Perouse, who have then brought the younger people in. So they've the older people coming in, and I've got some great elders working for me there on site, and they mentor the younger guys. They tell them the benefits. I've got some fantastic testimonies and stories from some of my candidates or some of my employees. But I think the biggest thing comes down to, and I'll be straight up, I did this today. I basically spoke to a young candidate who was looking for a job, young Indigenous fella, just come out of jail. He's just done 9 months for theft and violence-related incidents, so robberies and stuff like that. His biggest concern about getting out of jail was that no one was going to employ him. No one wanted to employ him. He had no skills. And I said to him, well, there's 3 things that I need from you. And he said to me, what's that? And I said, I need a commitment that you want to learn new skills. And he said, yep, okay, I'll work with that. I said, all I need from you as an employer is that you've got life skills. I said, have you got life skills? And he goes, I don't think so. I said, well, do you know right from wrong now? He said, yes. I said, do you know the importance of not going back inside? He goes, 100%. I said, have you got people skills? He said, oh, well, I hope so. I said, obviously you've spent 8 months inside jail and you've been able to communicate with the custodial officers, you've been able to communicate with other inmates. I said, you're communicating with a man who's running a multi-million-dollar business on a Zoom chat from your phone or from your employment consultant's phone. So I think you're doing pretty well. He looked at me and said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, that means that gives me employer satisfaction. I'm happy with that because I can teach you how to fill a mop bucket. I can teach you how to use chemicals. I can teach you and support you in a number of things. And we can get you to the skill sets that you need. I said, you know what? This is not a be-all, end-all job. This is a job to get you employed. This is a job to keep you off, the parole manager off your back. I said, I'm more than happy to ring your parole officer. I will speak to them. I'll tell them that they can come down and see you at lunchtime on a Tuesday to save you leaving site, so that you don't have to sign off and go off site. And I've been able to do that. My background is security and corrections. So I've had the opportunity to work with vulnerable people coming out of and working in jails and in correctional centres. And I think the biggest difference has been, and I'm getting direct feedback from New South Wales Corrective Services and their probation parole unit saying that, if they had more employers like us, they would have a better rate of keeping people out of jail. Now,
so much, Warwick. I mean, sorry to cut across. That's really a fascinating approach, of kind of a very enlightened approach to employment and recruitment, and I suppose enlightened self-interest in the best sense, because you're sourcing kind of a very good pool of workers who perhaps some of the other organisations are missing out on something because of their negative and incorrect perceptions, actually. Tony, you wanted to come in there. I saw your hand being raised. So yeah, did you have a follow-up point there you wanted to make?
Do you know what? I was actually applauding Warwick because I was just really enjoying what he was saying and just that kind of approach. But I did, with me, I will have always something to say, and I do think that again that the employers who are potentially a bit more sophisticated in understanding how to work with this talent pool, are gaining advantages that other employers aren't through their traditional methods. And I'm going to say traditional methods which I think inadvertently screen out people, because I don't think there's a ton of employers out there who are deliberately trying to screen out unemployed people, but their methods and their kind of tick boxes for doing recruitment that does happen. And in the UK, we've got a number of different examples of really big employers who've very successfully engaged with marginalised groups. So you've got Timpsons, who have got a huge proportion of their stuff coming directly out of out of their prison custodial sentences. They've got a waiting list of staff for months ahead, whereas there's other large employers in the UK who are really struggling to recruit. And I just think that it's a really interesting challenge for all of us to help employers understand how they can utilize perhaps again disadvantaged or marginalized groups to their advantage.
Thank you. I'd like to bring Sabine
just don't do it too well, okay?
Yeah, of course. Right. Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you. If I could bring Sabine back in now, if I may. Quite a few years ago at the Pôle emploi head office in Paris, I saw a fascinating presentation of an approach called simulation recruitment, which was very interesting. Pôle emploi discovered there were lots of hotels who were short of staff, and there were lots of potential recruits from migrant communities. The one issue they had was at that moment, they weren't particularly fluent in French, and so they were finding it quite difficult to kind of deal with some of the interviews. Pôle emploi came up with this fascinating approach, which was showing somebody a kind of scaled down model of a hotel room and asking people to do what they'd logically do in kind of setting up the room. And at certain times during the exercise, they'd suddenly get a message something else had happened. And what they found was that there were people who were incredibly adept at working in that kind of situation, which I thought was very creative. Perhaps building on from that, Sabine, you often deal with a lot of people who are kind of disadvantaged in the labour market, the people Warwick has described as doing a fantastic job with in terms of recruiting. Are there any programs you specifically utilise in France for kind of attempting to kind of ensure that perhaps employers who don't have kind of the vision that Warwick's got are kind of prepared to maybe recruit people who they've got some kind of negative views about? How do you promote these people to your employers?
Yeah, well, we have different way of promoting these people, but the simulation you were talking about, actually we still use it, and it's really working really well because it's based on abilities, and so we're not taking into consideration the qualification of the person, of the experience or the degree. We just realize, like with the employers, we have some observation and job analysis with the employers to point out all the skills which are needed on the jobs, and after we have a gradation also to know what the level is required for the job. So it's one of the way to help people without the qualification or the specific profile to get in touch with the company. And what is really interesting in that simulation recruitment is also that the company agreed that if the person has the skills, it can help the person upskills with the training and start the jobs. But we also have other programs. You have to keep in mind that the shortages are the same in Europe also. So some employers have also labor difficulties to recruit. So what we are proposing as incentive, we have training, we have also immersions, and also we are working on upskilling the job seekers on the jobs. So we have different kind of measure linked to the national policies, but also the regional policies, helping the job seekers to get on the job. And one of the things we are facing also is sometimes the job seekers have mobility problems. So maybe they have the skills, but they need to go in a different part of France. So we help them also to get on the job. And that's some of the program we have. Of course, what is really important is that we also develop a lab. We have different labs in France, and we put together all the different actors like university and also partners who are working with, for instance, people with a disability and also the young people. We have a program called One Young Person for one solution for one young person, which helps to develop the skills and put the person in trainings and internships with the company, which helps to face the shortages in certain jobs. Well, so we have a wide range of different programs to help the job seekers to develop skills and also to be to have a better matching with the job offer. What we are trying to work with during the labs, also with the company, is to think about different way of providing services, so they can help us to create services we are really customized for their needs and also what they are expecting from us. Like, for instance, during the pandemic, we have a platform that we used and which was really successful. It was helping companies to get in touch with job seekers, but on urgent jobs, you know, like, for instance, in health or logistics, food industry. And so it's really helps to find candidates who wanted to work in those sectors, and we help companies to help them to get on training if necessary. And we also have some fundings for the trainings, because Pôle emploi can also act as in the funding of the trainings, which is really important. We also developed all the digital services, because sometimes it's difficult for the job seekers to go for an interview. So having tools like on the platform for presentation, like on Sphere Emploi, we have a platform, social media for job seekers, which helps to get in touch with employers who can present their companies and their jobs, and after they can have interviews. So facilitate the recruitment is really the core of our mission as far as the employers, and after helping them with adaptation programs or contract also, which helps the job seekers to develop the skills which are needed and maybe missing in their profile. I'd like to say also, since we are paying the benefits, we have all kinds of profile in the job seekers. We have some job seekers who are maybe long-term job seekers, but we have also job seekers who just lost their job because of the pandemic or maybe other. So I want you to keep in mind that all the job seekers are really different wide of profiles, and some are really skilled workers also.
Thank you very much, Sabine. So yeah, a very varied kind of a group of people on the labour market. Perhaps, Frank, if I could bring you back into the discussion. I paraphrase, but I think somebody once made a comment that forecasting could be particularly unhelpful, especially if you want to know what's going to be happening in the future. But rolling forward, if you were thinking about perhaps maybe 5 or maybe 10 years time, increased automation, it's moving very, very quickly and rapidly. You touched on skills a bit earlier, but if you were thinking you were sitting here again in about 10 years time, what skills do you think would be particularly in demand? And perhaps even more interestingly, can you think of any current skills that maybe would be of much less use in a few years time than they are now?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
I will talk for us. The main skills that we are looking for is communication skills. And for communication, I think it's really difficult to find this on CVs. You really have to have interaction with your candidates. This is what we are calling them. We are doing video calls. So it's kind of difficult to say how we can use automation for that. I think for other people or other companies, they can really use automation for CV screening or all this kind of stuff, but I don't really believe too much in automation in recruitment, to be honest, because what talking with candidates is really important, and you still have to have the human part in this in your project when you're looking for people. And even sometimes automation cannot work very well. You can miss something on the CV or as human also, but I think maybe it will be a mix with human and automation, but you cannot only use automation even 5 or 10 years, because I really think also people, they want to have a human in contact, not just a machine. And I don't really believe that you can do the whole process only with automation, is what I think. Really.
Thank you very much.
If I can add something,
please, yes,
Eamon,
please do. Yes.
That's also why we are implementing the skill-based approach also, because it's really important to keep in mind that what is really important for candidates, it's the soft skills also. So we are organizing, for instance, special events where people, employers and job seekers can meet, and in different situations. Like, for instance, we have like a lot of events. Last year we have like 42,000 events all over France, I would say 2/3 of them were for employers, and it was opportunities to meet candidates in different ways also. Like, for instance, inverted speed dating. Just the candidates, they choose the company they would like to work for and to have an interview instead of the opposite. And sometimes it's really a good experience for the employers, because they can meet candidates that maybe they would never have in interview, and they can see their motivation to work for the company. We also organize events like there was an event in logistics. It's called Log and Play, and it's mostly entertaining moments, where candidates and employers, they can have challenges together, and the employers can see the candidate in a different way that when they have an interview, because the person is showing if he's a team player, or also if he can his values, if they can see it. So it's really important for employer to change the way, and we are trying to provide different kinds of services, so the recruitment will be facilitated, and also we can spot out those kind of skills.
Thank you. Interestingly, I think what we're all kind of touching on is that the kind of relationship between a job seeker and employer is potentially changing, possibly as a result of a kind of all the technology. I think there's a great concern that the kind of algorithm tick box approach is going to have some kind of unforeseen negative implications, possibly in screening out lots of people, and also preventing employers perhaps getting very good candidates for a job. Perhaps, Joe, if I could bring you back in with a kind of a bit of a strategic question in a way, but I hear that some people think the relationship is going to be changing more in favour of the job seeker based on technology. Other people think it will be the other end of the spectrum. A lot of other people are not quite sure, but do you think the kind of power relationship, for want of a better term, between a job seeker and employer is going to alter considerably as a result of all of this kind of digitalisation, automation? Or do you think perhaps it will settle down where we are now, ultimately, when we've gone through all the angst about this dystopian future, possibly? But
I hope that, I like reading dystopian novels, but I hope that the future is more utopian, and I hope that, I suppose on the digital point, I think particularly when one thing to say is that, particularly in relation to, say, people with disabilities, I think what has been refreshing has been how many jobs, I mean, clearly there's still jobs like cleaning and security where you need to be there in person, and retail and hospitality, but jobs that for a long time, people with disabilities or disabled people have kind of found that they were locked out of because job roles weren't flexible, suddenly overnight have become flexible. So I think that's, I hope that there's no going back from that. And I know that many companies are looking at their estate and looking at whether they do need as many offices, all of that. But I think that there's the flexibilities, but not across all sectors. I've mentioned some where, you know, hairdressers where there aren't the flexibilities, and there are lots of others as well. Construction, of course, even where automation. We were talking to a company before Christmas that really wants to automate some of its processes off-site to reduce the amount of work and reduce the hazards on site. So yeah, move work off site to reduce the amount of time they spend. So there are some benefits, but of course we know that there's other aspects such as surveillance. There've always been different kinds of surveillance in within the workplace, and automation. You can think of you know, logistics, for example, where again it can exacerbate existing poor workplace practices. So I hope that it will all balance out in the end. I must say, I don't deal too much in predictions myself, and I'm very concerned about, say, the next couple of years and how we make sure that firstly people who are struggling to get into work do manage to get that foothold into the labour market, and secondly yeah, depending on what the labour market does over the next couple of years, that we are preparing for changes, but I think changes that are closer to us, if you see what I mean, in the shorter term rather than the longer term. So I do sometimes have concerns that the futuristic focus is you know, there's lots more work to be done. I think Warwick's account is so important. Yes, it is a very particular kind of organisation, but for me and for the colleagues, I think we want to see more organisations like that who are just doing things differently, even if they, you know, they haven't got the kind of backdrop and community context that Warwick's got. I think there's definitely, and the employment services to me are crucial as well in that piece. In, you know, as I said at the beginning, not just sending bodies, but actually preparing people and supporting them within the workplace for sustainable careers, and supporting the organisation and spreading the word about some good practices and providing HR advice where some companies and organisations are maybe not getting their recruitment right, and actually to their own disbenefit, basically. So I'm hoping that at some point Warwick's going to tell us about his experiences of engaging with different employment services, because I know he's engaged with a lot, so he's been extremely patient. My data shows that employers will get, this is across countries, my data shows that employers will give employment services a second chance to get things right, but beyond that they start to lose their patience as to, you know, in terms of the two things, quality of service from the provider and also the quality of the job seeker. And again, that engagement piece from providers is working with the employer to say, are you sure, asking them what they're looking for, but sometimes what they're looking for is perpetuating labour market inequalities. So sometimes there is that conversation to be had in order to open up opportunities and do things differently, as I say, for the benefit of the organisation in the longer term.
Thanks very much. Warwick, perhaps I could bring you back now. A couple of things actually occurred to me there. Tony mentioned Timpson's, actually a UK company who've got a very good reputation for employing people who are ex-offenders, actually, and they've been very successful. And I heard an interview with their HR director on the radio, I think just before Christmas, and it was quite an inspirational kind of message, and it was very interesting. And then hearing your incredibly inspirational kind of description in our discussion this morning, one thing that's occurred to me is, I appreciate your organisation is based on a certain community mostly, but why aren't more employers doing what your organisation's doing? and what this Timpson's organisation is doing in the UK, because apart from being a very kind of uplifting kind of vision, really, it also makes such sense. But why is it, particularly in the UK, Timpson's are famous for doing something nobody else is really doing, actually? And I wonder why that's the case. If you've got any perspective, Warwick, as an employer, why more people aren't adopting your model, if I can call it that, kind of helping themselves, actually?
Well, I guess perception is reality. So, you know, people look there and go, oh, well, this person's, you know, an ex-con, yeah, as the words go. Not a rehabilitated inmate, not a rehabilitated client. This person's an ex-con. So, you know, unfortunately, there's people in the market out there who then will try and abuse that. Yeah. And I think the difference is that wholly and solely, it comes down to the culture of the management and the recruitment model. It doesn't come down to the organisation. I've worked for big corporate organisations, criminal record working for them. Now, you know, they're the first ones to get up on their high horse and their soapbox and tell them how they're all about, you know, changing the gender gap and doing this and doing that. Well, you know what? It starts at the ground roots. It starts at the bottom. It starts with your cleaners. It starts with your maintenance guy. It starts with your janitor. It doesn't start at your upper echelon and saying, oh, you know, we're going to put female CEOs in because we want to genderize the business and do all that stuff. Well, you know what? What about the 4 inmates that have just completed a course inside the facility to get out to then not have to go back? Why can't you change their lives as well? That's the difference. I guess working with different organisations, like, you know, I've got the privilege of having a background in corrections, and particularly with the Department of Services here in New South Wales. And I'm working with Pat Abood at the moment, who is the Deputy Commissioner in charge of special programs for Indigenous inmates. And his main plan is, and we're working with our partner RTO, is to run rehabilitation training programs for the candidates coming out, so that when they hit the ground running with the soft skills that everybody's talking about. And, you know, the hardest part about, you know, some of these employees and dealing with some of these employees wholly and solely is their mindset. Yeah, they've been institutionalized for a period of time. They've lived in a square concrete box. You know, their reintegration is changing. You know, the philosophies behind the Way Forward program here in New South Wales and how we work with inmates and help rehabilitate them is completely different. But, you know, the inmate market is only a small part of my employment market that I employ through. You know, I look at, you know, disability services, the TTW model, which is, you know, the transition to work. So that's the 17 to 24s. Yeah, so that's our next generation of workers. That's our next generations of people who are going to that are going to be paying our super for our older age pensions. You know, and if we're not looking after them and we're not putting them into roles and giving them sustainable employment, then that where's our country going to go? You know, we're at 4.2% unemployment at the moment. Okay, so, you know, 4.2% unemployment in New South Wales, it's 4%. In states like South Australia and WA, it's as low as 3.9 and 3.4%. You know, yeah, we're at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to selecting candidates that are unemployed. Yeah, so, you know, we've got a 3-tier system here in Australia: the Stream A's, B's, and C's. Previously, under the current contract employment services, Stream A's, they don't get anything spent on them. They're basically ready for work. So they've got to go and find a job. And as you were saying before, you know, people aren't taking jobs now, or people have been sold previously in jobs to, oh, it's a transition for you. It'll wait till something comes up in IT. Wait till something that comes up in, you know, you're a history major. Wait till something comes up there. And then they go into this involvement. I don't sell them a job that they're going to do for 3 months. I'm going to sell them an opportunity to change their life and change their family's life and get a career. Yeah. So, you know, would you want to be the guy throwing rocks or slinging mud on a construction site? Or do you want to be the traffic controller who earns just as much money as the CW2, who really has a pretty terrible job, standing on the side of the road where you've got opportunities for professional development. You've got opportunities to go further. You've got opportunities to do further things like, traffic management plan training and WHS. There's more opportunity there. Same with my cleaners. All our cleaners, we put through a Cert 3 in cleaning operations. Once they've completed that, those that want to do stuff in WHS, that want to do things in property services, I've got a couple of the young guys that are working for me now who want to go and mow lawns. They said, mate, we'd love to go and mow lawns. We've been cleaning people's toilets for the last 12 months on site because that was something that we needed to do, to be able to provide for our family. Some of these guys are taking home over $1,000 a week. So, they've gone from earning $520 a fortnight to $1,000 a week. We've changed people's lives. I've had, and I guess this is where it comes down to the difference between the employer and the working with the employment services. I've got a great working relationship with Assuria here in Australia, New South Wales, and they understand our philosophy of employment. They understand what we're looking for. They understand we're looking for people with that life skills, people with people skills, people with a willingness to learn. Because if you've got those three traits, or you've got those three capabilities, you can do anything. You can be the next Richard Branson. So, that's the difference. And I'm able to, if I can harness that in somebody and give them those life skills and give them what I call career skills, be it qualifications and training, then why not be that employee that does it? If I have someone that works for me for 12 months and then goes and finds their dream job, mate, fantastic. If I've got somebody that works for me for 3 years, never misses a beat, mate, I'm even more happier. You know what I mean?
Thanks.
But
Yeah.
I'm not going to crucify my recruitment model just because that person, I don't think that person's got the skills to clean. They've got a willingness, and human nature is amazing. They've got a willingness to do something, mate. People can make it happen if they've got the right support, the right mentors, and the right help. And that comes down to something as simple as me spending 2 hours on a Saturday afternoon with one of my young Aboriginal couples that work for me. Both partners, both of them work for me, male and female, and helping them write a budget so they could save money to get their own house. So, you know what? If that's 2 hours on my Saturday afternoon, that's generational change right there. These are 21 and 19-year-old couple with 2 kids already. If you put them in the generational washing machine, that what should happen to them, they should be on benefits for the rest of their life, and their kids will then go on benefits. That ain't going to happen. We've changed this generation now. Their kids are going to see that their parents work hard, they save money, they have a value for money, they have a value for life, they have a value for employment, having a job, and they can see that. They're making change. They've changed their whole lifestyle. They've changed who they're associated with. They've changed who they were before to who they are now. And in a 2-year period, that has been a transition, which is a good news story for me. Both Morgan and his wife or partner have left our employment. They're finished. She's gone to get a job as a receptionist in a real estate office. Perfect. That's where she wanted to be. She wanted to do admin. He's gone to get a job. He's now finishing his crane driver's tickets, and he's going to be working lifted on a crane. So he's probably going to be making $2,000 a week. So, what have we done out of that? That's the difference.
That's thank you very much. Perhaps unfortunately we're heading towards the end of our time slot, which is very sad in such an interesting discussion. But perhaps before asking for one quick question of all of you, actually, I'd like to bring back Tony into the discussion.
Eamon, excuse me. I think Tony had raised his hand.
I was good indeed. Yes. Yeah, Tony.
So if we bring him in,
to make
we can come to the end.
I'll make a really quick comment, and it follows what Warwick was saying. And I'm absolutely not speaking on behalf of Warwick, but it was more to your question, Amy, about why aren't more employers doing this? Why aren't they focusing on this group? And I think there's a couple of things which are important about that. Firstly, I think there's a capacity thing. I think sometimes it takes time and it takes effort and it takes a real focus from an organization to change some of their policies or their culture, as Warwick talks about, and make an effort to do that. Now, in the case of Timpson, and I know this from having spent a bit of time and talking to them, that in the first instance they wanted to do something for the right thing. They want to do something for the right thing. Yet what they've found as a business over the years is that their retention of those staff is unreal. And they don't have to continually churn, get new people in, and people are leaving, and because people want to stay with them. They look after their staff. And I think that kind of echoes some of the stuff that Warwick says. And very briefly, I'd just say this, is that I think businesses need help to do this. I think, when you've got the likes of Warwick and other organisations who have made that effort, there is a real effort there. But the majority of people in the UK and other countries and territories are employed by small employers who don't necessarily have huge budgets and don't necessarily have huge HR and resourcing teams and policymakers. I think we can do more to help businesses to change their policies and to help them understand the business benefits of working with unemployed groups. So I will pause there because I know we're running out of time.
What I was going to do actually is ask all of you just one question for me. It's a bit of a conclusion, really. If you, in one sentence, could come up with what you think is the most important aspect of successfully building this relationship between employers and employment services, what do you think it might be? So perhaps Sabine, could I ask you first, actually, in one sentence, what do you think is the number one imperative? What's the most important factor in building a positive relationship between an employment service and employer?
I would say trust and transparency also. So it's really important for us to give information also to the employer. Like, for instance, we have a widget we have on the website, who indicates immediately when the job offer is posted, what will be the difficulties. And so we can act and react really quickly with the employers and find solution. And it's also to be able to give them information on the labor market and provide solution. And but we also have to be realistic. If we don't have the skills, it might take more time, and we can build some solution with them. And we have to co-create some solution together sometimes, and we have to change the way they are recruiting, just not thinking they can find easily specific profiles. Maybe it will take some more times, and they will have to be more involved. But trust and transparency is really important.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So trust and transparency. Frank, have you got your kind of a quick overview? What do you think is the most important in building this good relationship between an employer and the employment services?
Yes, I will say exactly like Sabine, for trust. We need to trust each other and also to have a good communication to build a long-term relationship. Like this, they can really understand what we are looking for, and they can provide the service and to find job seeker. They can find a suitable job for them also. So because if they don't know the company, if they don't know our values, also they will work for nothing. They will just provide job seeker or don't have the right skills for the company. And like this, like Sabine said, it will be transparency, trust, and good communication for a long-term relationship.
Indeed. Okay. Tony, what would your kind of most important factors be, do you think?
I will go back to the point I made about supporting businesses, because I believe that there's a huge amount of public money goes into supporting job seekers, and that is important, and we shouldn't our investment on supporting businesses to be the recipient environments of job seekers. And I think that that's going to just focus on the two sides of the labour market. So we're doing a lot with the labour force, which is good, but let's help businesses to take on some of our people as well. That's my point.
Thank you. Warwick, you've actually used the employment services very successfully, which is great to hear. So what do you think though would be your key messages for kind of ensuring that your kind of good relationship could be replicated everywhere? What's the key ingredient for making it work?
Well, obviously trust and transparency are a big thing. Honesty is one thing, but also a respect between the job consultants and the business development managers we deal with is a big thing. They have a respect for our business. They don't want to damage our brand and reputation. and that goes a long way with what they ask for out of the commitment. So I would say, for me, it's a respect for our business and a respect for protecting our reputation and brand is a big thing, because you know what, I can get all the money in the world for a job seeker. You know, I can have employment consultants lie to me about people's histories. Doesn't change the fact if the person's got great people skills and the person's got great life skills and's willing to learn, I can do anything with that person. So for me, it comes down to that they've got a respect for my business, that they won't knowingly damage my brand or reputation. Because they, unfortunately, Joe, you said that most places will give them a second chance. But I'm a one-hit wonder when it comes to stuff like that. So if they lie to me or they're untruth to me, that's it. I'm gonna walk away. So and I think for that, and for the main reason being, and I'll be quick, is that my time is precious, and the more time I spend wasting my time with a job agency, the less time I can spend with my people, and they're the ones that that need my mentoring and my time and my direction and my assistance, and just to be there to be an ear. That's where I see my employee wellbeing as being that model. So yeah.
Excellent, thank you. And Joe, the last word, perhaps, what do you think is the key then to this fruitful relationship between an employer and an employment services provider?
I definitely echo trust, because that is clear from my research data, and what's been said about communications as well, honesty, and building on actually from what Warwick's just said about understanding, listening to the business owner, whoever you're dealing with, but also, I guess, reflecting Tony's point, also being kind of willing to challenge, but in a nice way, actually, to educate, because employers, not all are as enlightened as Warwick or Timpson's, and they're looking for ways to ease their pain points, and that's the big opportunity here, as well as helping people, as Warwick says, and we've all said, really, it's about generational and societal change. So it should be a win-win for everyone. So that's why employee engagement is a key ingredient in this.
Thank you. Perhaps one very final observation for me before handing back to Miguel for some kind of summary conclusions. Much of the discussion in the last sort of 3 to 5 years about the impact of technology on this relationship is that the role of employment services will be more of a human focus on those farthest from the labour market, and that more of the kind of very employable people now will be dealt with through kind of automated means. I think one thing I've taken away from this morning is there are some risks actually in taking people out of the relationship in all areas of recruitment actually, and I wonder whether that perhaps generalization will need to be reconsidered when perhaps people realize that too much kind of taking the person out of recruitment could be adverse for people, irrespective of whether they're kind of very highly skilled or somebody at an entry level, which is an interesting discussion perhaps for a future event. But thank you very much. It's a shame we haven't got longer. Time goes very quickly, but thank you for your fascinating inputs and incredibly thought-provoking observations. Perhaps I can hand back to Miguel for some conclusions from our discussion today. Thank you.
Thanks, Eamon, and thanks so much to all of you for the fruitful discussion. Got a lot of food for thought for myself and to share further on. So I just give a very quick few minutes of what I heard in this discussion. And I find worth highlighting. I'll probably miss a lot of points, but I'll put the whole video up and in edited version so people can go then into deep. Basically, what you said now in the last round was summarizing very well what constitutes and makes successful cooperation between public and private providers, between the employment service and employers. And that is trust, transparency, respect, investment into the relationship, and a common understanding, which is true almost for all types of communication on a professional but also human level. So we're talking about a professional and a human relationship between employers and employment services. In the beginning of the discussion, we were asking ourselves, what are the value propositions that employment services can give to employers? Why should employers want to engage with employment services with types of service they cannot provide themselves or ask from a big recruitment agency? And I think the two employers we had here that Warwick and Franck represented showed us one way, and that is basically catering to a more modern way of looking at skills and attitude rather than at qualifications and background. So if employment services can cooperate with employers like you that are basically looking at the person and not so much at the career or the things that have been done before, but at the willingness of doing a job, of learning and of engaging, then employment services are a good fit, because with a large pool of skills they have and the possibilities they have to support development of skills, that will be a good match. So that's maybe the niche. Maybe rather than having employment services try to cover the whole market and get all the vacancies, it's good to focus on those vacancies that where employers are behind, that are ready to strike the deal of developing people rather than only careers, if that makes sense. We talked, and that kind of proves the point that investment is important. Pôle emploi, we saw, invested a lot. So it's not kind of a service to employers that comes by itself, but all this needs investment, and that's financial investment, capacity investment, and time. And what I think is also important that you mentioned is that you keep in communication not only on a short term for a one-off, for a recruitment fair or something, but for a longer term relationship that also allows for feedback, that the employer tell the employment service what's working well, what's not so working so well, what need to be changed to make the partnership successful and long term, because long term and sustainability, I think, is one of the main challenges in employer engagement, that people stay on jobs, that employers come back to the employment service, and that there is a kind of common understanding and learning kind of relationship where you listen to each other and things are changed. And we also said that recruitment, it's not only the employment service that needs to change all the time and adjust, but also the employer might need to change the recruitment strategies, because the recruitment strategies and the view on skills might just be outdated and might not kind of cover the full challenge of where we're going, which is the skills-based approach of the future. Employment services can also help navigate programs. We've seen that in a couple of examples that sometimes the breadth, the size of the programs and the number of programs is so complicated that employers will not bother to try to understand it or get through it, but they need help to be guided through it and kind of use the potential of what they can get from an employment service. So yeah, basically to round it up, I think that building on these major values that you mentioned now in the final round, like trust and transparency, and build on that together, I think is a common success factor. Work on skills, on attitude, and yeah, maybe basically be a bit less afraid of the future, maybe not keep so busy with what will be in the future, but maybe learn a little bit also from what Warwick mentioned, which is look at the past, learn from the old way, because that's where the knowledge and the experience comes from. And maybe we don't need to reinvent everything all the time, just build on what we have, and yeah, trust in the services, trust in the possibilities, and trust in human nature, which sounds like a general philosophical closing to this, but it's basically like the basis of human relationships. So thank you very much for your readiness to sit with us for 1.5 hours in different time zones, early morning to evening. And I hope that the recruitment and the mission you're on continues to be so successful. Thank you very much. I'll be sharing the video with you and we will be in touch. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye,
you very much.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.